Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining the session, and we're going to get started because we have 45 minutes for a very exciting panel. Can everybody hear me all right? All right, the next question's for you. So how much in the past year, raise your hand if in the past year you've heard about engagement analytics or impact analytics? Oh, good, that's probably what brought you here. That's pretty good. So what we wanted to do is put a panel together to explore how they can actually help libraries make determinations about meaningful use. What is use? What are people really doing with those products when they're using them? So to explore that topic, I would like to introduce my distinguished panel. We have Helen Addy from Nottingham Trent University, and this is her first visit to Charleston. So welcome to her. And then we have Jesse Konecki from Cornell University, not his first visit to Charleston. And then we have Boaz Nadav Manez from Brown, also not his first trip to Charleston. And I'm Andrea Eastman Mullins with Alexander Street. I work on our collections and also our platform. And I want to give an introduction today to the topic, and then I'll turn it over to them. But first, why do we need impact analytics? We already have Counter, and we already have, in many cases, for determining cost per use, very in-depth title level statistics. And both of these things continue to be valid and useful. So Counter is the only way still to really compare between vendors and compare use between vendors. The standards are very defined, whereas in other areas they're not. And title level still gives us that ability to track cost per title, which continues to be important. But there's really more to a return on investment decision than just what does it cost per title. And that's what we're looking at with impact analytics and engagement analytics. So we're asking questions like, well, when somebody uses a title, what does that mean? Are they just watching The Godfather on the treadmill, or was it a documentary shown to a class of 50 students? That's really different. And what are students doing with the content? Are they adding it to playlists? Are they clipping things? Are they annotating it? And what does that mean for different institutions? The answer might be different, whether those things are important or not. So we're really entering a part of the conversation now where we're asking, well, what constitutes good use? If we're going to look at this more in depth, what does that mean? And as vendors in this conversation, our responsibility is to make sure we're as transparent as possible about the data. So we want to make sure that we're sharing, and for the past year on all our video titles, we've been sharing this kind of access information about which titles were used, were they cited, were they embedded, did somebody create a playlist, did they annotate it, where are users coming from, where is the referring traffic, are they using mobile devices, are they not? So we're capturing all of that data and then working with libraries to help learn, well, what's interesting about this? What do you want to learn more about? And we're also experimenting on the front end of our products by asking the end users to interact a bit more with our content and capturing analytics on that side. So on the videos, we're asking them, how are you using this? Are you using it for class or for entertainment, and capturing that data? We're also doing interactive quizzing in some of our counseling videos. So we're enabling faculty, or in some case our editors, to ask questions throughout the video to test student understanding. And then we share the data of how those are used back to the library. So you can see how are the videos used, how are they rated, and if there were any interactions, how many, what happened. And so we have all this information, and now we ask, well, how can we use this? What can we learn from it? And we're seeing more in the research now that there is a connection between the level of engagement and learning outcomes on campus. And this is a study from Indiana University looking at e-textbooks over the past several years, and they found that the more interaction there was, the higher the grade of that particular student. So in this case, they're defining interaction as highlighting in a textbook, but you can see that upper line there, that's students who got A's and students who highlighted the most. And you can also compare usage stats against benchmarks in the industry. So if you're looking in your library, well, okay, I see that most people are coming to my videos through our LibGuide or through our library site. Well, it turns out that that's generally the case for most people using video, according to the library journal. And also how students are using video, assigned for class or for entertainment. So the good news is that there's more data than ever to evaluate content, but the bad news is it's really hard to determine what to make of that. So for that hard question, I'll turn to Helen.
Okay, so thank you for the round of applause. It's really exciting to be here. I've wanted to come to Charleston for ages. For those of you who don't know Nottingham Trent, because not only is it my first time here, as far as I'm aware, it's Nottingham Trent's first time here. We are a post-1992 university. What that means is in the UK, they changed the rules in 1992 to allow previous polytechnics to become universities. So we're essentially a teaching university, and there's some facts there that just to sort of put it in some sort of context. Probably the important thing to note is I have never seen the skies that blue in Nottingham. I think that is photoshopped, to say the least. In terms of the libraries, we've got 3 site libraries around Nottingham. For those of you who don't know, we're almost slap bang in the centre of the UK. We couldn't be further from the coast, so it's really nice being here, to be near the coast. The one thing I wanted to point out from this slide is that bullet point about the National Student Survey. I know that you don't have an equivalent here in the US, but every year our final year undergraduates score the university and their university experience. And there is a question in that specifically relates to the library and the library collections. And that means every year we get marked by our student population. And I think it raises the stakes in making us really need to make sure that we're providing the resources they need and satisfying, their requirements. So, to put the possibly slightly vague concept of user engagement analytics, I want to start by giving you a couple of examples from Nottingham Trent of when standard counter usage really wasn't enough for us. In 2015, our head of department was lucky to get some additional money from the university for a service that he called Your Books, More Books. And the premise of this was if you were a final year undergraduate or a postgraduate and the library didn't hold what you needed in terms of resources to support your dissertation, tell us and we'll get it for you within 3 days. And as the head of the acquisitions team, I had the job of delivering this in about 2 weeks flat. What we did was we put some money into 5 evidence-based acquisition plans from major academic publishers. And what we found at the end of the period with those 5 EBA plans was they'd all performed differently. What we could do at the end of the plans varied because the initial deposit was different, the number of resources that were in those plans was different. And I suppose as the person making the decision, I could see that for some plans I could buy everything that had been used 6 times or more. In other cases, I could buy everything that had been used 25 times or more. And what I didn't know was, is 6 good? Is 25 better? If I only select the things that have been used 25 times and I've got a customer who's used something 20 times and I don't select it, is that going to be a problem? Are some of those decisions going to come back to bite us? And it made us realise that just looking at usage alone doesn't necessarily give you the information that you need to make really good decisions. The other part of that Your Books, More Books service was we put some money into making our documents delivery process much, much quicker. And in some cases that would be next day delivery from the British Library. In some cases, and I will whisper this, we used Amazon Prime next day delivery. But we also used short-term loans. And what we found at the end of the process again was that a significant number of those short-term loans had only been used for 5 minutes or less, and therefore we'd incurred no charge. And again, we asked ourselves, okay, is that good? It's good for our budgets in that we're not paid for that use, but what would be the view of our users? Would they be really unhappy because they were in and out there because they were really hoping that book was going to be the thing that would get them there first and it was useless? Or would they just be fairly neutral about it because it was something they were just looking through on a book list and they could tick it off and go on to the next one? Or were they really, really thrilled because they were looking for a particular quote or a reference and they were in and out in 5 minutes and they were absolutely ecstatic? Each of those 3 possibilities was an entirely reasonable one, but we had no information to know which one it would be. And so that really made us start to think about what sort of usage or engagement analytics would be of more use. So typically, would it be better to know how long someone had used something for? What sort of activity they had undertaken whilst they were using it? because when you think about it, I'm sure if I did a show of hands, we've all borrowed a book from a library and taken it back unread. We've all recorded something and never watched it. You know, all of that counts in counter usage terms, but it shows no engagement at all. And it was about that time that Alexander Street said they would be interested with partnering with us on user engagement analytics. I have to put my glasses on for this bit. So we've recently concluded our EBA plan, and the first thing to say is that the engagement analytics gave us far, far richer information on which to make our decisions than counter usage alone would have done. And I'm going to pull out a very few examples that will hopefully demonstrate why this was the case. So if you look at the table that you've got there, I'm sure most of you, like us, would tend to decide to buy the things that have been used most when you've got an evidence-based acquisition plan. But if you just look at that table, you'll see that the video that had been watched most in percentage terms was not the one that had been used most times. So if we decided to only buy the things that had been used 7 times or more, we'd potentially be rejecting that bottom one, which 61% of it had been used. So it gave us more information on which to base our decision making. And in our experience, when you conclude an evidence-based acquisition plan, your money doesn't run out neatly at the bottom of a usage bracket. So you are deciding in counter terms between different resources that have been used the same number of times. And what we found was these engagement analytics from Alexander Street really helped us with that decision making and impacted on the ones that we decided to choose at the end. So as Andrea has already mentioned, there are lots of different types of reporting in these engagement analytics, and we can see a value from an acquisitions point of view for all of them. So, if someone's cited something, if they've shared it, if they've cut and pasted it, if they've pushed it to RefWorks, if a lecturer's put it in their resource list, all of these types of behaviours we believe show a level of engagement, but also it gets us closer to that somewhat nebulous concept of our users valuing the content that we've given them. So to go on to a couple of other examples from a not particularly acquisitions point of view, I can't tell you how excited my resource discovery manager was to see this slide. It's almost received wisdom amongst librarians that all of our users, of course, start at Google. And this really showed that is not the case. We have Primo from Ex Libris, a ProQuest company, at the top there. And it really backed up our policy of loading MARC records. At times we've questioned, is it worth loading MARC records or should we just turn things on within our link resolver? But this absolutely, backed up our feeling that loading MARC records was particularly an important thing to do. For us in the UK as well, where we've got a widespread use of resource list software, the fact that 2,722 of these resources had made their way onto resource lists was again important, not only because it's a sign that our academics were engaging with it and using it in their teaching, but again from an acquisitions point of view, I would need to make sure that I purchased those with my deposited money so that we didn't lose those links in the resource lists when the plan came to an end. So we were really pleased with this. The table doesn't go down far enough, but Google was something like 22. It was tiny by comparison with everything else. Moving on to sort of more strategic issues for us at Nottingham Trent, we haven't traditionally used social media to push our e-resources for reasons that, in retrospect, I don't think are very sound. We were a bit worried that we might be showing preferential treatment to one publisher over another, but we've seen the light now, and we are now starting to use different types of social media to push content. And what you can see there at the bottom is that it's possible to track within the Alexander Street metrics where the referring URL has come from. So one of the things that we want to do more work on is trying different social media routes to see which are the most effective. we were struggling a little bit with methodology, I have to say. How would we know if someone was going to go and look at it in any case? But what we want to do, once we've worked out an effective methodology, is try pushing by Facebook, pushing by Twitter, getting some of our subject librarians to mention specific things, because then we can track spikes in usage, hopefully, and at least draw some conclusions about the impact of that promotion. So, a few final thoughts from me about where we go next. We do feel at Nottingham Trent that we want to understand a bit more about this percentage used. What does it tell us, and what would good look like? From a student perspective, they might only use 5% of the content, but that's all they need. It might be enough. So, would 90% be better than 5%? We think there's more work to be done there, because it's an important distinction. I think we're struggling a bit as well with this low percentage use. We wouldn't expect a student to start reading an ebook at page 1 and carry on to page 328. So is there something around the type of usage that would suggest really engaged usage rather than just flitting, randomly across the content? We do recognise, as librarians, we love to know what our customers think and what they're doing. So the idea that they might, rate a video or say what they're using it for is gold dust for us. But there is a potential, conflict there. I think we've all of us gone to a website, and the first thing that pops up is a survey, and we know how annoying that can be. So there is a tension that we have to be aware of about non-intrusive use of our resources. And when I was talking to one of my team colleagues about, look at all this data we've got now, she said to me, "Oh, Helen, we don't need any more. We can't make decisions with what we've got." So, is it always the case that more data is a good thing? I mean, having just concluded this EBA, I would absolutely say it was a good thing. But I take the point. And for those of you who are publishers in the room who work essentially with text materials, we'd really like to challenge you to what can you do about giving us more engagement analytics. So, for instance, you must know how much people are printing, because you can tell them when they're printed too much. So is there something that you could give us that would give us some insight to how much people are using our text-based materials? That's me done, thank you.
How's everybody doing today? Where am I? All right, so I'm Jesse Kennecke, Cornell University Library. Thanks for coming out. I want to talk a little bit about things we haven't necessarily done at Cornell, but we're trying to line things up where we can do that, where we can make more effective decisions, hopefully, based on more than essentially just some number of uses on a thing. And how do we get at meaningful ways to do that? And so to illustrate it, I'm going to talk about initially streaming video, because there's been, I think, some good progress from vendors like Alexander Street and Canopy on building some visualizations around these other metrics, these the impact analytics. And but then I want to close talking a little about what can we do with some other content. So let's get started here. Streaming video. At Cornell, we collect streaming video for entertainment, collection building, and course use. Those are, I guess, probably our three primary goals in choosing what we're collecting. Each of these might have different impact analytics that are meaningful for deciding if we got the right stuff or what direction we should head with it. And things like entertainment and extracurricular. Slaughterhouse-5, we claim Kurt Vonnegut, though he dropped out of Cornell. But Slaughterhouse-5 was a community read a few years back. So all the incoming students were supposed to read it, but a bunch of people in the community also read it and had discussions. So we also got Slaughterhouse-5 up on our Swank digital campus, along with lots of other sort of popular films or art fit kind of films. ostensibly for entertainment, but in this case it also was applicable to not necessarily a specific course, but this academic pursuit we were doing. For collection building, we've done quite a bit through purchasing Alexander Street collections, Naxos Music Library, Medici TV. I don't know, anybody familiar with that? That's pretty cool. It's live music, well, not live music, but recorded orchestral music being performed, like right there to click, or operas and things like that. It's pretty awesome. Ambrose, some others. As well as some really targeted things. This Prendismo Hospitality is free, but we've sort of plugged it into our discovery system to support our hospitality management program. And a while back, our veterinary school produced a large number of sort of procedural videos, how to do a suture, how to spay a cat, those kinds of things. A lot of them were sort of short snippets, educational, and then that got picked up by a third party to sort of offer up to more of the rest of the world. But so these are some things that are supporting educational efforts, as well as those the ideas we have about the collections we should be building. And but how do we know? I mean, so streaming video is a relatively new content area for us, certainly compared to journals and books that we think we know exactly how to pick which are the right ones, except maybe we don't. So how do we take a new kind of content and really start to figure out what's the best fit for us? How do we, what are the user groups and subject areas that we need to cater to for this? What areas do we need to really get pretty specific title by title type things versus here's a pile of content, dig through it and take what you need? And how do we support that base? And then also identify the areas where we need to sort of be a little more strategic. And then how do we estimate the costs this is going to be so that we can either keep them under control or start to redistribute money into the right place? I don't know about all of you, but we don't have an endless supply of money. We've got probably more than some of you, though. So, and it doesn't grow. That's the big thing. So, but so we chose PDA as a way to evaluate this. We worked with Canopy, have set up basically all of the content on Canopy, which has probably tripled since we started this program. Anything new just gets added into that pool. Purchases get triggered there, but we can kind of really see the use, and we'll look at some of the visualizations that help us kind of see how this is how it's working. We've been in it for a little over 2 years at this point, and we had a couple goals here. We were getting a lot of requests for streaming video for courses. Many of those were available on the Canopy platform, or we could request Canopy to try to pursue the rights to be able to dish it out, and in many cases they're able to. So it's supporting that course use, but also it lets us explore from a collection development perspective what subject areas are getting used, where might we target both getting more video, but also where should that funding come from if it's focused in certain areas like anthropology or something like that. Over that time, we've gotten quite a bit of use. You can see this just this past semester. It's kind of going all over the place, but in general, it's higher. There's a lot of use for us to look at over these 2 years, and we're using this PDA still to basically provide broad access to a whole lot of streaming video, building up that data set that's going to help us analyze this better. So just from a raw usage perspective, in the Canopy platform, we're able to sort of look at that use by title, but also in subject areas, use by particular suppliers or producers of that content. which one's this? Oh, so playlists. This is where we start to get to sort of an impact analytic. Someone chose to put one or more videos on a particular list. They gave that list a title, and we can look at those playlists here and start to get a sense of some things people have chosen to bundle up in a particular way. This list, this is in date order of the most, no, I guess it's not. It's in some order. And, most of these list titles don't necessarily tell us a whole lot, though some of them are sort of a subject-based thing. Italian cinema, sustainability, those are cool. But when we look a little more in depth here, we can start to see like these week 10, week 4. These look like somebody put these together for a course. And to me, that seems pretty important that we should make sure we have these videos at least during the semester, not sort of pull the plug on them right in week 10 of the semester, for example. Exactly what's happening with those, we could look in and start to look at the usage of each of those videos, see if they're actually being individually used. But I like to think of some of these as helping us tell if something really got one use, but it was on one of these lists. Maybe that use was for a group this size, or kind of an in-class showing of that video. And that's really, 80 to 100 uses in a way right there that in traditional usage stats, that would be one. Like somebody checking out a DVD, showing it in their class, that's one checkout of that DVD. So some of the other things we are able to look at, there's usage across different sort of data points. The audience, this is kind of where the users are coming from, whether it's, we can see kind of how many people are connecting remotely through our networked access, types of browsers, types of devices. It's not big yet, but Canopy at least has a Roku, or basically you can connect through Roku and the various other kinds of Apple TV type devices and things. And there's starting to be use on those, like little slivers of use where does that tell us something about that usage, kind of the nature of how the people are coming into it. We've got to try to figure that out. And then finally sort of some things they've called engagement. So did somebody make comments on that video? Is there something in those comments that helps us decide, ooh, this is a good thing to keep, or is it sort of a neutral thing? Ratings. There's not a whole lot getting rated yet. I think this is one of those things that's going to build up over time, so it's hard to know what we can do with it. But the fact that someone chose to rate it tells us something. Playlists we already talked about. Then same thing with Alexander Street. So we have a lot of collections from them, and kind of deciding, say Alexander Street comes out with sort of a new version of a package in a subject area we've already gotten. Kind of looking in there to see what did that previous collection get. That's almost just the traditional usage look we've done, but Alexander Street's also got, say, this curated views, which is an attempt to bring together some of these various types of alternate metrics. Mentions in social media, things coming from learning management systems. If they can tell it's come from our Blackboard system, we may weigh that use a whole lot more than just a single use we don't know anything else about. I think we live in fear of yanking stuff in the middle of a course. I'm probably not alone in that case. But also being able to, so use across each title, but my favorite thing with this is, and Helen pointed it out too, is the average percent played of these particular things. So album.k 289, number 1, 98.25%, 8 times. So people are watching that entire thing pretty much every time they get down, and then maybe the credits start to roll and they turn it off. As opposed to the Italian is getting 2.42% across 6 views. So yeah, what's the particular impact of those particular uses? I think these two numbers together really can tell us a whole lot more than either one really on their own. And then also, but you can apply that same thing to viewing the collections themselves. So silent film online, a lot more people sort of watch those all the way through, or a significant amount of that film itself. Rather than dance online, it looks like they're going in and checking out snippets of particular videos and things. So I think that helps to tell us a lot more about these collections we've been purchasing. And all in all, this is to help us decide, of our piles of $100 bills, where to start sending them, where to get them from first. I see one Cornell Selector out there who's going to start doling out money soon. But no, where to pull that money from, and then where do we need to spend that to divvy up that limited size pie, basically. There's some cool stuff going on with streaming media. And there's interesting analytics being pulled together, and a few years in, we're starting to see some data that I think is meaningful and helps us make decisions. But what about some other content areas? I know we all know exactly how to decide which journals to subscribe to all the time, right? So Counter just tells us that, right? The report comes out and it says cancel these, buy these. But how can we get beyond Counter? Since by the chuckles, it sounds like you don't all think Counter's perfect for this. It is a piece of the puzzle, definitely, though, right? So Counter gives us these raw numbers. What do each of those mean? A huge number probably means we need the thing. A tiny number probably means maybe we don't. But there's a lot in between there. And again, even a small number could have sort of really important use in each of those. So I started working with a business intelligence class at Cornell that, and this is just recently, I have nothing to show for that yet other than what I'm about to tell you. But they look around campus for projects to do, and they essentially they want large amounts of data put together that they can then try to build visualizations around and help us make basically a business intelligence solution to helping us answer questions we might have, as well as coming up with some of those questions we may not have thought about ourselves with an outside eye that's not like ingrained in library speak already. So I handed them counter data, price data, and I tried to get where we could have the list price for something that we all know is perfectly based on a cost or on a supply and demand curve by all of our wonderful publishers, right? But so list price, but also we've been in package deals and arrangements with these publishers for so long. We have our own price, which is often very different than that list price. So trying to give them those different cost points to look at some cost per use there. That's a thing we've all been doing to various degrees of success for a while. But how about the rules that we have in place for working with this publisher? Is there some amount we can cancel with this? Are there some titles within that collection, that publisher's portfolio we can, some we can't? Do we have sort of free reign across this publisher? Can we sort of articulate those rules in our sort of decision-making visualization? And then like Web of Science and Scopus give us some key information that's kind of hard to piece together with the rest of this. And we do it often maybe on a title by title to look up what's the impact factor of that title. Is it cited a lot by Cornell authors? Do Cornell authors publish in that journal more than in, say, a different journal? And those are some impacts that may not show up in usage, but if we were to cancel the journal that all of a particular department was publishing in, they might get a little annoyed with us. So it's, I think, important information to know. Open access. Looking at those gold open access JR1 reports, but also help having that there almost side by side with the other information we have from that publisher. What does that tell us? And those open access things, that's a different kind of impact. Particularly, I'm starting to see some of that growing at a pretty steady clip. And then consortial arrangements. So what are our partners doing? Do we want this sort of same kind of data from Brown and some of our other Ivy Plus partners? Do we want to look at what other schools with an agriculture program are doing, or other veterinary schools, that sort of thing. To be able to compare and contrast a little bit and make sure we're not sort of shooting ourselves in the foot too much as a community, and that we're covering things pretty well. So that's where I've stopped. I wanted to kind of leave it as some questions because I don't know what these answers are yet. I'm going to meet with all these business intelligence students, and I'm sure I'll have a magical solution for you next time we meet. And now, I'll hand it off to Boaz to explore other ideas. Uh-oh. Okay. What are you? There.
Hey. That doesn't work.
Here we go. Looks like you're good.
Yep. Okay. I have a cough and my throat is a little bit kind of funny. If I cough much, and I apologize already because that can happen. In any case, thank you so much. It was really interesting. I got just a few minutes, and if I'm not going to be quick, then you won't have any time to ask us any questions. What I'm focusing on is mostly on the impact on staff, and also the way that we maybe want to explore other things when it comes to impact, whatever we call impact here. So we are really curious what they really do, right? The people that dance around the library. And we are not sure what it is, and we actually usually kind of ask ourselves also, what is it that our staff do? And we're not sure about both things ever. And we have lots of conferences and good talks and drinks and other things about it. As we go, forward, there is this kind of idea of the library is more like an organism, like it's not a piecemeal machine. We are all, we are tied together to many functions, and we do want to explore the red end of this text, which is mostly about network stuff, open source, emotional, whatever that may be, and storytelling. So we want to tell our story. It's important for us to be viable and continue to serve our public well. So how do we do that? We can do that in several different ways, and impact analytics is just one more thing that hopefully we can kind of put into action. There was an interesting, Jesse, what you were saying about the big data. There is this whole big data, and the data analyst, Brown, has done something similar. We have a data center at Brown where we asked the experts to look at our counter statistics and see what is being used. And they ended up with very few journals that they directed as the ones that they can actually say something about, because they have ISSN in the URL, so basically they can say something about very small amount of use. I think that it is upon us to explore the small use heavily, and try and figure out what it is that we know about the users, the small communities, the communities of interest, groups that work together, graduates that work across institutions, and I put all those other books and ideas here just because there is this whole sense or nonsense about the stuff we don't know. There are ideas about junk space. What's happening with ebooks? We don't know. The containers are not clear enough. The Kindle. So now we have a way maybe to start clarifying some of it, but it's so important for us because our value will end up with the small communities of users, and us serving them well will probably provide us some relief. So tied to this is the way that we will describe items that are used deeply in that level of impact. So if we know, and that is tied to this predictive analytics idea, if we know that something in a group is used heavily, then we can redirect our resources to do more metadata work that is relevant, do more global standards. As librarians, we need to get into that game quite a bit. And we want to build services in our shops around those networks of those communities that are happening as we go about this. And also, we are kind of worried about emotions, but what is impact analytics? That means that somebody saw a movie and stopped because it was too boring or something happened or I don't know what. We want to be storytellers and approach donors in a certain way and, you know, be important. That means also that we really need to connect emotionally to the users that we are working with. Some of the data about when do people use something and drop it, or when is it that the network, the small network, find it good enough to talk in Facebook about something, let's say, that's very significant for us. So let's try and continue this. Now the system side. This is kind of me saying, come on, you know, like we have all of this data. We have the Donkey Kong systems forever doing very similar things for us. And we should go to the business intelligence systems, the ones that read what we're going for, that can understand that have some predictability running in the end of it. So we put resources into what is being used. Some of those, sorry about that. Some of those systems now, those motherships that buy more companies, they have access to discovery, access to usability. We can ask them directly to provide services and tools that talk directly to use. So we should be there in that place. And all of it, maybe one day, will end up in different types of library work that we do. Maybe we can think, how do we allow flexibility of discovery? So there are, you know, all those nice books and ideas about drifting. What does it mean to find something, really? This is in the middle is a map of Paris, and if you drift in Paris and you go from one building to another, you may actually follow the same tracks because there are limits on how much a drifter you can be in one particular place. So thinking, what is this data, the impact stuff about people leaving something at the right time? iPhones now going to read our face and will know how we feel about content. So we do need to, let's not forget that we are significant in this playing field because we are the neutral or not side in this, and we really need to push it forward. So that's just like an illustration. The user is going to be always kind of invisible, but let's hope that with the collaboration with Alexander Street Press and other vendors that are kind of going for it, we can kind of come up with better ways to address our users. I'm done. Thank you. So questions? Who wants to ask someone something? Quiet. Yes.
There's a microphone you should probably go to. Sorry.
I'll repeat it.
Okay.
My point is very small. When I stay at hotel after hotel after hotel, survey comes in, they ask me in the survey, did you come for this? Did you come for leisure or both?
Yep.
Now, I don't actually know if they're going to treat me differently or if they prefer, I don't know, business or leisure or both. help you? I mean, what might you imagine you could do?
Okay, I'll answer first. That's great. The question is, will we find value in a short survey in the end of? I think it's short. In a short survey in the end of a movie, saying, have you used it for business, pleasure, whatever, some sort of a category around the use. I don't believe in surveys of this sort because they sort of assume that the user knows the use. And I don't know if it's always the case. And we convert collections money to data, to raw data, right? So I rather actually not pay for a package. I rather pay for access to the data. And in a similar way, I rather not have a category built into a channel of information that the user is kind of saying to me, this is what it is. I'd like to know what they actually did. It doesn't matter how they call it, you know? So for me, it's less important, but maybe I'm missing here something. What do you think?
It's an excellent question. I don't know. I mean, we could come to some point where we have a certain amount of money and we decide we're only supporting academic things and we cancel everything that only ever got reported back to us as being for entertainment purposes. It's probably not a good idea. And I think the accuracy of those answers can be questionable. I'm not sure that's the best sort of data point we would need, but I think there are questions that could be asked that could give us something useful to work with. Sarah? Or did anybody else have a follow-up thing? That's Vincent Olivier. L'Olivier. I'm not, and I probably should be since I dove into this topic. But yeah, so it's a study triangulating around, just to repeat the question, usage, citation, and what was the other? Feedback from the feedback. Right, and that's kind of what we're trying to get at is, what are those decision points that are outside the numbers? Can we actually put numbers on that anecdotal information in a way? Like, oh, I know we need this. Why? And I've got 5 faculty saying we need it. That's probably enough. Is 1 faculty saying we need it enough? How many faculty saying we need it is enough if we can only get 5 out of the 10 things as well? And how does that compare to, say, to the citation and the usage across those as well? And I like the idea of trying to weigh those in some way equally where we're not necessarily only favoring one thing over another. Anybody else?
Well, I would like to take more questions, but we are out of time, and I personally have to walk to the Marriott for the next session. So thank you all for coming. If there's more questions, we'll be around.